Echoes of the Real by Peter Lamb. Chapter 1. Cracks in the Mirror. It started with the clocks. In the lobby of the Hartman building, where I've walked through nearly every weekday for 6 years, the large brass-rimmed clock behind the receptionist's desk had always struck me as symbolic. Grand, serious, industrial. A reminder, I used to think, that time belongs to the system, that we punch in and out like good little machines. But that morning, Monday, I think, it was wrong. Not slow, not fast. Wrong. It ticked. Backwards. 3 seconds forward, 2 seconds back. Then stillness. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, laughed quietly to myself. Surely a mechanical fault. But when I pointed it out to the receptionist, she glanced up, then frowned. "It's working fine, Dr. Renner." I stared. The second hand now moved smoothly, perfectly forward. Nothing wrong at all. I nodded, forced a polite smile, and walked to the elevator. But inside I checked my watch. It was 2 minutes ahead. Then, as the elevator doors opened, 3 minutes behind, something was off. Something small, but real. By lunchtime, I'd convinced myself I was tired, overworked, probably dehydrated. I'd been studying perception under stress lately, testing the way belief shapes memory in split-second scenarios. Maybe my brain had flipped its own wires. But then came the articles. 2 co-workers argued loudly over the same news story, each convinced the other had read it wrong. One swore the headline said, "Floods displace over 40,000 in Jakarta." The other snapped back, "It was about drought, not floods. I just read it. Dry spell enters 3rd week in Jakarta. You serious?" I checked. On my phone it said wildfires. In Sumatra. Not a drought, not a flood, not even the same island. But no one else seemed to notice or care. That was when I felt it. A fissure in the mirror, a crack in the shared script we all read from. Reality, I realized, might not be absolute. It might be interpreted, agreed upon like a group project we forgot we were writing together. I kept testing it all afternoon, asking little things, directions to a cafe, the color of a coworker's shirt. No 2 answers were exactly the same, just slightly off, as if the world was being rendered in real time based on the viewer. But everyone believed what they saw, completely, confidently, and I started to wonder, what if truth isn't out there at all? What if it's in here and we're just syncing up long enough to pretend it's shared? That night, I went home and recorded everything I'd seen. I still have the tape. On it, I say one thing I can't forget. I think the world is starting to disagree with itself. Chapter 2. The Observation Paradox. At first, I didn't tell anyone. Not my colleagues, not the department chair, not even my friend Lena, who once claimed to believe the entire universe was just a thought God forgot to finish. I figured I'd ride it out, like a bad dream or a cold. Whatever was wrong, I'd explain it eventually. But then came the lab trial. It was part of a larger study on perceptual bias. We were showing volunteers brief video clips, half-second bursts of ambiguous motion, and asking them what they saw. A ball rolling left or right, a figure walking toward or away. Optical illusions filtered through different ideological cues. We'd done this dozens of times before. The patterns were always the same, until that day. That day, something changed. The first subject, a political science student from Ghana, saw the ball move left. The second, a Norwegian engineering major, swore it moved right. The third, an AI programming student from Tokyo, froze mid-response and asked if the ball had bounced instead. I replayed the same clip for myself. This time, the ball seemed to hover. Mid-air, not rolling at all. I ran the data. No errors, no glitches. The video file was clean, same frames, same timing, same code. And yet, everyone saw something different. I checked the environmental variables, lighting, screen angle, even room temperature. Nothing accounted for it. The only common factor? Belief. Each student had completed a worldview profile survey before the trial. Religious affiliation, national identity, political leanings. And the pattern was undeniable. Those from collectivist cultures tended to see the ball following others. Individualists saw it move alone. Those raised in religious traditions interpreted its motion with intent, like it was guided. Atheists saw randomness. The observation changed the observed, not in metaphor, in measurement. This wasn't just psychology anymore. This was physics, or something beyond it. I sent the data to my colleague in Copenhagen, Dr. Felix Thorn, an expert in quantum cognition. His reply came 2 hours later, a voice message. "Alex, if your results are accurate, you've breached the edge of something much older than science. We always assumed the mind filters the world. But what if it builds it instead? The next day, Felix disappeared. His office was cleared out, his emails deleted, no forwarding address, no contact, just a line of text left on his voicemail. Nothing exists that is not agreed upon. Chapter 3, Ghosts of Faith. 2 days after Felix vanished, I found myself wandering the old part of town. Not to investigate, not to clear my head, I just walked. Something in me craved places with memory, streets that remembered footsteps, buildings that remembered names. And that's when I met her. She stood alone in front of St. Mary's Cathedral. I only noticed her because she looked as confused as I felt, staring up at the stained glass with a tilted head, like it didn't match what she expected. She must have heard me pause beside her, because she turned and said, "Are you seeing a mosque?" It took a moment for the words to sink in. "No," I said. "It's a cathedral, Anglican, 1892. Why would I see a mosque? Because that's what it is." She stepped closer to the steps and pointed at the tall arches. "The minarets, the crescent finial, look at the tile work. That's Ottoman, not Gothic." I followed her hand. The stone spire, the cross, the carved saints, they were all there. But she saw none of it. To her, the building was entirely different. We walked together, talked, compared notes. Her name was Samira, raised in Morocco, a devout Muslim turned secular scholar of theology. She had visited this place years ago and remembered it differently, clearer, brighter, more symmetrical. Now, she claimed, the building itself changed based on who looked at it. We ran a test. We stood on opposite sides of the square and described what we saw into voice memos. Later, we compared recordings. 2 completely different structures, no overlapping details, different number of windows, different entryways, even different weathering on the stone. Reality was no longer singular, it was refracted. "It's not just architecture," she told me, eyes narrowing. "I've seen people vanish from conversations. Change faces. One man greeted me with a Hindu prayer, another with the sign of the cross. Same man, same clothes, seconds apart." "What do you think it means?" I asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "We're not seeing the world, we're seeing ourselves." That night, I wrote a question in my notebook. Are others real, or are they fragments of the same mind? I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the cathedral shifted, morphing between mosque, temple, church, ruin, and blank stone, as if it was waiting for me to decide what it would be. Chapter 4, The Collective. Samira left me with a single word written on the back of her card: Concordia. No context, no message, just the name, scribbled in violet ink, underlined once. I assumed it was a group, maybe a foundation or a book title, but the search engine results were vague. A few obscure philosophy forums, one dead link to a journal on cognitive synchrony, and a private file-sharing network that required an invitation code. I nearly let it go. But something in me had shifted. A deep itch, like I was starting to remember something I'd never known. So I waited. And 4 days later, an email appeared in my inbox. Subject: Your perception is unstable. We can help. From no reply at concordia-node7.info. Attachment: coordinates. Message: bring no devices. Come alone. I thought it might be a prank or a trap. But by then, my grasp on what was safe had already eroded. So I went. The coordinates led me to a derelict observatory outside town, nestled between trees that seemed too symmetrical to have grown wild. The air smelled of static. The stars above flickered, not like light but like corrupted data. Inside, I found them. 6 people in a circle. No introductions, no names, just silence, until one spoke. "You're not here because you saw something. You're here because something saw you." "What does that mean?" I asked. A woman in a gray coat turned toward me. "Reality isn't external. It's a shared hallucination with rules. But lately those rules are weakening." Another voice chimed in. "There are too many contradictions, too many belief systems competing for dominance. The fabric of agreement is unraveling." "You're saying reality is decided by belief?" The first man nodded. "No. Co-belief. Reality doesn't respond to individuals. It forms where minds align." They called themselves the Collective, a loose network of thinkers, defectors, and pattern perceivers, people who noticed inconsistencies, people who remembered versions of reality that no longer existed. They didn't claim to know the truth, only that it was fractured. They showed me footage, people walking down the same street filmed by different cameras, seeing different buildings, traffic lights switching colors depending on who approached. One man who died in an accident and was recorded giving a lecture the next day, Same voice, same face, no explanation. They had maps of fracture zones, places where consensus had failed entirely. Places like Jerusalem, Pyongyang, and increasingly, the internet. They said the internet was becoming the most fragmented geography in existence. It's the one place where belief doesn't require proximity, where individual truths grow unchecked. And now they're spilling into the waking world. They had a plan. Not to fix it, not to restore any one truth, but to observe the shift, to find the prime consciousness, a theoretical origin point, the first observer, the one whose perception seeded the collective illusion. And somehow, they thought it might be me. Chapter 5, The Fracture Zones. The first time I saw a fracture zone, I nearly collapsed. It was a Tuesday. Gray sky, barely any wind. The world felt tentative. The collective had identified several hotspots, areas where the fabric of consensus had thinned so dramatically that reality behaved like overlapping slides in an old projector. They called them fracture zones. I called them impossible. The closest one was in West London, a single block near King's Cross where nothing could be trusted, not shape, not color, not even gravity. They warned me before I entered. You'll experience desynchronization. It might feel like dizziness, déjà vu, or dissociation. Stay focused on your anchor phrase. I'd chosen one. I am not alone, and this is not mine. I walked into the zone just before noon. There were people, dozens, each moving in slightly different time. Some were jerky, as if animated on a slower frame rate. Others seemed blurred, like overexposed film. Street signs changed language mid-sentence. The smell of fried food became incense. A dog barked, and I heard it as a church bell. Two men passed each other and both flinched. One saw a priest, the other a soldier. The world was coming apart at the seams. I approached a cafe that looked Victorian from the left, but postmodern from the right. People were eating food that didn't match what was on their plates. A girl laughed in perfect sync with a man who wasn't there. I took out a small mirror, an old experiment we used to test focal anchoring. I looked into it, expecting to see my own face. Instead, I saw a child, eyes wide, curious, familiar. The reflection blinked and whispered, "You built this, remember?" I dropped the mirror. When I looked up, the cafe was gone, replaced by a building under construction. Same people, same location, different time. I turned to leave and bumped into a woman standing still, eyes closed, murmuring, "Anchor phrase, anchor phrase, anchor phrase." I grabbed her shoulder. "What are you doing?" "Staying here. If you forget your belief, it replaces you." I left. I don't know how long I was inside, 10 minutes, maybe 30. But when I emerged, my phone said 3 hours had passed. 3 hours. Gone. I reported everything to the collective. They said I did well to leave when I did. One of them, Jian, a systems theorist from Singapore, told me something I haven't forgotten. Reality isn't collapsing, it's diverging. Too many truths, too few bridges. Truth had become territorial, geographic, emotional, and where truths collided, the world broke. Chapter 6, Alex's Awakening. They called it conscious unbinding. It wasn't a drug. Not exactly. More like an induced state. A way of loosening your grip on the filters that shape the world before you ever get a chance to question them. The collective prepared me in silence. No bright lights, no questions. Just a darkened chamber, a single chair, and a low-frequency hum that vibrated in the marrow of my bones. Jian stood beside me, adjusting a set of electrodes on my temples. "This won't hurt, but it may change everything." I nodded, because by then I needed to see what lay beneath. Not for science. Not even for truth, but for peace. They guided me through a breathing pattern, in through the nose, out through the mouth, count to 4, hold for 4, release for 6. As the hum deepened, my thoughts began to fade. Not in panic, but in surrender. And then everything fell away. No chair, no room, no skin, no me. Just awareness, raw, unmediated. I floated in something that wasn't space. It had no up, no down, no center, only gradients of intention, like currents in an ocean of will. And I saw it. The threads, countless streams of belief, woven together like fiber optics, each glowing with the color of meaning, some red with anger, some gold with faith, others blue with logic or green with longing. They danced, tangled, crossed, and wherever enough of them merged, they formed worlds. Tiny bubbles of perception, little pockets of agreement. I saw entire cities hovering in shared belief, statues rising and falling with the strength of memory, even people, constructed not from biology but from patterns of expectation. I wept, because I realized we never saw the world, only reflections of ourselves, mirrored through billions of other minds. And then something touched me, not physically, a presence, warm, terrifying. A voice not in sound, but in absolute knowing, entered my consciousness like sunlight through stained glass. You are the echo of a thought that asked what is, and I am the question asking again. I wanted to ask who it was, but I understood. There was no who, only a center, the origin, the prime consciousness. And then I fell, back through the threads, through minds, through stories, through selves, until I woke up, sweating, shaking, in the chair, in the chamber, in my body. You came back? Was I gone? Long enough to forget everything except what matters. I walked outside into the night. The stars looked different, brighter, no longer distant points of heat and gas, but tiny windows into other truths, other minds, other worlds. Chapter 7, The Question of Self. In the days that followed, I couldn't look at people the same way, not because I distrusted them, but because I wasn't sure they were there. I watched the barista hand me coffee. She smiled, asked about my day, joked about the weather, and all I could think was, did I build her? Was she just a fragment constructed by my expectations? An echo of someone I needed to see in that moment? Or worse, was I her echo? The collective warned me this would happen. After unbinding, the illusion of separateness fades, Gian had said. You'll question the autonomy of others, even your own. I tried to fight it. I wanted to believe in people, their stories, their complexity, their free will. But then the anomalies returned. A man on the train read a newspaper headline I couldn't see until I looked directly at it and the words changed. A child I passed on the sidewalk vanished when I turned around. A coworker who I'd spoken with every day for months wasn't on any staff list. Reality was responsive. And more disturbingly, it was obedient. I ran a test. I walked into a bookstore and focused intently on a book that didn't exist. The Hollow Mirror, a theory of recursive perception. I imagined the cover, the author, even the blurb on the back. I searched for it and found it. On the shelf. It was there, exactly as I'd visualized. When I brought it to the counter, the clerk smiled and said, "Oh, that one just came in this morning." There was no author by that name, no record of the publisher, but the words inside were real, written in a voice eerily similar to my own. And the dedication? To the first observer, the one who forgot they were dreaming. That night, I stood in front of a mirror for hours, not moving, not blinking, just watching, waiting for the moment the reflection might choose to move differently. It never did, but I wasn't sure it meant anything, because I no longer knew which one of us was real. Chapter 8, Collapse of Consensus. It began at the borders, not political ones, not drawn on maps, but perceptual borders where competing realities brushed against one another like tectonic plates, and like all fault lines, they started to tremble. At first, it was subtle. A news anchor on a national broadcast referred to an event no one else remembered. A cathedral in Prague simultaneously displayed two religious symbols, depending on who entered. A market in Buenos Aires shifted from pesos to Bitcoin to barter, all in the same hour. But then came the flickering. Footage started leaking online, videos too consistent to be hoaxes, sidewalks that changed material under your feet, airplanes arriving at gates that no longer existed, couples mid-conversation forgetting who the other person was. In one video, a group of tourists screamed in panic as their hotel blinked out of existence and returned seconds later, redesigned, restaffed, and unrecognizable. The collective called it the consensus cascade. Too many minds, too many truths, no dominant agreement strong enough to stabilize the illusion. Consensus was splintering, and where it broke, the laws of physics stuttered. Gravity weakened, time looped, identity dissolved. Gian showed me satellite data. Regions on Earth where belief clusters collapsed into quantum fog. We call them gray zones, areas where no shared perception remains. There were 5 of them, each the size of a small city. Nothing consistent, no visuals, no sound, just data static. And then the death started, not from violence, from loss of definition. People caught in the gray zones began forgetting who they were, not in trauma, in deletion. One woman wandered into a zone near Damascus and was found days later alive, breathing, but unresponsive. Doctors asked her name. She couldn't answer, not because she forgot, but because she didn't believe she'd ever had one. The erosion of truth wasn't violent. It was quiet, intimate, terrifying. When consensus fails, reality does not scream. It simply stops. I returned home to find a stranger in my flat. He looked like me, spoke like me, but claimed he'd never seen me before. I ran his fingerprints, checked the lease, the metadata of his files, all correct, all legally his. And still, I found my toothbrush on the sink, my socks in the drawer, my voice on the answering machine. I asked him if he believed I existed. He stared. Don't know. Neither did I. Chapter 9, The Choice. By then, I had stopped trusting mirrors, or voices, or even thoughts. Each day brought more fractures. The world wasn't unraveling all at once. It was peeling back in layers. Like old wallpaper in a house no one remembered building. I hadn't seen Samira in weeks. The collective had splintered. Jian's last message was a single sentence typed at 3:42 a.m. If we are all reflections, who made the first face? I never heard from him again. Then came the call. Not a phone call. Not a voice in my head. Something deeper. A pull. It drew me to the edge of what had once been a forest, now just a field of gray light and flickering half-forms. I crossed into the zone, and there, standing alone, was the figure I'd seen during unbinding, the presence behind the threads, the one who spoke in knowing, "You are ready, I don't know what I am." Exactly. It reached out, not a hand but a gesture of will, a pressure without touch. And in that moment, I saw two paths. On one path, I accept the illusion, return to a life of shared belief, let consensus reform around simpler truths, solid, digestible, comfortable. A world where coffee tastes like coffee, where strangers remain strangers, where time is linear, and I would forget everything. On the other path, I choose to retain awareness, to remember the threads, to live as a watcher, not a participant. I would see every mask, hear every thought behind the words, feel the tremor in every false foundation, and I would be alone. Utterly. I can't choose, I said. I didn't ask for this. No one does. Choice is not permission. Choice is the price. I stepped forward, not because I understood, not because I was brave, but because the only thing more terrifying than losing reality was never knowing it was a lie. I reached out, touched the gesture, and the world shifted. Chapter 10. Echoes. I awoke to birdsong, not the glitched echo of a synthetic world, not the static chorus of overlapping perceptions, just birds. The light through the window was warm. My flat was familiar, too familiar. Books in the right places, coffee mug on the counter, my toothbrush alone in its cup, no intruders, no shifting faces, no contradictions. It felt stable. But I knew better. I walked outside. The city was alive, people bustled, phones rang, buses hummed, and yet, in the corner of my eye, things pulsed. Street signs shimmered faintly, like breath on glass. The air had depth now, layers. I could feel the threads again, fainter, quieter, but still there. I sat in the park and watched a child play. He pointed at a cloud and said, "Look, it's a whale." His mother corrected him gently. "No, sweetie, that's just a cloud." But I saw it. For just a second, it was a whale. Maybe he still remembered. I've stopped trying to convince people that the world is stitched together by agreement, that what we see depends on what we believe, that maybe we're not separate at all. But I've started leaving clues, a phrase in a journal, a symbol on a subway wall, a sentence whispered in sleep to those still listening. You are not alone, and this is not yours. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone looks at me across a train carriage or a crowded cafe and smiles, like they remember, like they see me. Not the face, but the echo behind it. I am not awake, not fully, but I am no longer blind. Somewhere out there, others are stirring, other minds loosening the veil, and together in silence we are dreaming a new truth into being. The end. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, ring the bell, and tell your friends about my listening library.